Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome back from summer, everyone. The first item is the minutes of this committee's meeting held Monday, July 26, and the recommendation is to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Just prior to proceeding to our first item of business, the General Manager of Plan Development would like to make a few introductions.
Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Gilbert, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and enlarged committee members. Welcome back. We got a pretty hefty agenda for you to start on today, so it's good to get back at it. If I could, Madam Chair, I'd just like to introduce a few new faces sitting beside me here. To my immediate right, and I know a number of the council members have met him, but we're very fortunate to have Raul Alueva, who joined us beginning of August from the city of Surrey, and where he's worked for a number of years, between a stint also in Richmond and before that in Surrey as well. Raul lives in Burnaby. Got a young family that keeps him busy, but he's pretty keen on the planning side. And as a matter of fact, I would say he really hit the ground running in August. It was a quiet time in terms of not so many meetings, but a lot of the reports were going through the process pipe, and they benefited from his involvement and input. So I just wanted to acknowledge Raul and welcome to our team, and it's a great addition for our department and our city, so I think we should be proud. And secondly, just by way of, most committee members know Tom Hawkins. Tom's sitting with us this afternoon. He's filling in as the acting development services or development planning supervisor, and he's been carrying that on quite capably in Erica's absence. She's back next week, so but Tom's here today to help out in some of the presentations. So just wanted to acknowledge both of them and thank them for all their help.
Well, thank you, Raul. I know you come with a great breadth of experience, which we certainly welcome, and I hope you're enjoying it in the banana belt of British Columbia, which is Coquitlam. I hope you're going to enjoy your time here, and welcome. And Tom, good to see you. I've seen you around here for many, many, many years, and you do an admirable job for us, so thank you. Next item, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next item 2, is a delegation. I'd like to invite Mr. John Wright, who's going to come forward and speak on a housing choices pre-application for 220 Nelson Street. As the committee may recall, we've just instituted this process. We had one last year, and this is a chance to get an advanced look at something coming our way.
Okay. Does staff want to make any comments on this before, or would you like Mr. Wright's presentation first?
Madam Chair, just very, very briefly, as Mr. Gilbert said, this is a new step that was added at the Standing Committee's direction last year. I think it's a great opportunity for very early in the thinking and visioning process for someone that might be looking at an idea for a property, particularly a creative infill situation, to meet with staff and then come forward with a concept and get it before Standing Committee early on, so if there's any questions or thoughts around it, it could be very helpful in shaping that application. As well, I just want to point out the package is quite short and sweet, and that was by choice. There's not a whole lot of information up front. Well, there isn't that much to go on, but certainly there's the proposal itself and some site plans and some elevations. But also, too, you'll find there's a letter attachment in there. Because, again, staff aren't doing a description or assessment of the idea at this point, this early point, but it's an opportunity for the proponent to put forward their thoughts and their ideas. So you'll find that letter in there, and as well, Mr. Wright wants to make a brief presentation.
And just as a point to the new members of the committee, and Mr. Wright, welcome. The committee last year was Councillor Reamer, Councillor Robinson, and myself. This year we've have the pleasure of Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Lynch. This is a very new thing that we've done. Because we're going through sensitive infill in our city, in the older part of our city, when we come across something that's going to be quite radically different, what we've invited people with really good ideas to come forward, present them to the committee. There's no need for any motions or any approvals at the end of this. It's an opportunity for our citizens to come forward and give us what they think is a good idea for sensitive infill. So having all that said, welcome, Mr. Wright.
Thank you, councillors. This is a perspective, first of all, of my proposal for 220 Nelson Street. It's 2 duplexes with three bedroom units and 1 4-bedroom unit. It has street frontage on 3 sides, a blessing. It's at the corner of Alderson and Nelson, and it has a 18-foot fall from the front to the back of the site, which allows me to tuck parking under each building on the program on the downhill side and not have it face major streets.
Mr. Wright, if I can move those forward for you, if you just...
Okay, there, I got it. Okay, just talking about the context. This is our site right here. It has 2 non-conforming dwellings on it right now. Both dwellings are very close to the property line. They're in very poor condition. There is a multi-family dwelling to the west and a multi-family dwelling in a historic farmhouse to the north. The Foyer Maillard, Paul senior residence, is very nearby. And one of the important framing points for my concept was the older houses in the neighborhood, here and across the street, have a 4-meter or less setback from the property line. These are elevations of the streetscape. This is the elevation along Alderson. This is our proposal. And as you can see, it fits very neatly in the rhythm and scale of the streetscape. Compare that to the farmhouse directly across the street. This is the elevation along Nelson Street. And as you see, it also blends very well into the streetscape. I attended the workshops, and I listened very carefully what the people had to say about this process. And there was 2 major concerns. One, people were concerned about protection of their views, and they were concerned about discouraging monster homes. So that was a key part of framing my proposal here. I have, by employing a stick frame roof, I managed to tuck the building program up underneath the roof, and I've kept the overall height of both buildings to well under 9 meters. The existing zoning allows for a height of 11 meters. So I've protected the views of the neighborhood, and I have buildings of a scale and proportion that are very unmonster-like. This is a site plan. The key setbacks are 4 meters on both side yards and the front yard, and of a meter setback from the lane. Plans. Here's a couple of views. One from Alderson looking down the hill, and another one from the lane looking back up the project. And here we have the parking plan showing how I've tucked the parking on the downhill side of the site and really followed the grade in this project and have minimized the retaining walls and both to make a good streetscape and to keep the project affordable. So that's the broad strokes, and if there are any questions, I can answer them now.
Okay. Is there any questions? Me. No? Mayor Stewart? No? Oh. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Lovely looking project. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good day.
Next item, please.
Next item, item 3, concerns the authorization of a development permit and a development variance permit for an addition to an existing industrial building at 915 Tupper Avenue. Staff recommendations that Council approve the signing of the DVP and that the Mayor and City Clerk be authorized to execute it, and that Council approve the signing of the associated development permit. Again, that it be executed by the Mayor and Clerk. We have a presentation by the applicant. I'm not sure if staff have introductory comments or not.
Okay, come forward, please. Who's coming forward first, staff or the applicant? Your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Nader Tabrizi. I'm owner of the property.
And your address?
Is a 915 Tupper Avenue in Coquitlam.
Yes.
Good afternoon. This is our property in a 915 Tupper Avenue. As you see, this is a existing building. Is a front of it, no any sidewalk or street lighting, and old permit supposed to be used the parking spot front of the building, and this side is a yard of the building, which is a landfill. Used to be, I believe, was a garbage dump, and the land is very soft. We couldn't use that side of the yard because of the softness is sinking down all the time. We tried to put the asphalt and everything cracked in the first winter. And this is the other picture of the yard, which you can see. Our purpose is that make the new building in there. Our storage right now is outside storage. Is damage our material and is very hard to move the material around. We want to bring everything from outside to inside. Basically, we extend our storage area, not any of our fabrication area. And we can provide the parking in the side of there. We asking, instead of the 19 parking spot, we can have a 13. We have a parking study here. It show the 11 is sufficient for our operation, and we can provide that. So any?
Okay, is that your presentation?
Yes. That's
Okay,
all.
thank you. Any questions? Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. I have seen some photos that indicate a large number of vehicles parked on the street. And yet you've had a traffic study saying that the 13 spots will be sufficient for you. So where will those 13 spots be, and how do you propose that some of these vehicles on the street are no longer going to be there? Is your parking going to be on your lot? Well, where is it going to be?
All the parking and all the storage will be in our property. We have this used to be was a 4 lot, this land. We consolidate those. One in the east side we're going to use for parking spots. And this drawing, unfortunately, is very small. If you see,
I had problems reading some of those drawings.
This place I put a pen on it. That's in a side of the building, and also 4 more in a front of the building.
Right, okay. And you mentioned loading bays in there as well.
Yes.
because some of the trucks have been delivering their materials outside on the street. Will those loading bays alleviate the need to do that?
Everything will be in our property.
Everything will be on your property?
Yes.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Lynch.
Actually, my question was, mic's off again. My question actually was more towards staff. I always have a difficulty when we talk about our zoning bylaw and how much it requires, and there always seems to be some transportation study that come forward and can rationalize and justify how it is that we can always approve a variance. And I was wondering if I can have a little bit more explanation of why it is that our bylaw says it needs 19 spaces, and then they go down 6 spaces for employees, 4 for company vehicles, 1 for visitor parking. How is it that we can have that much of a disparity between what our bylaw asks for and when the people like the proponent want to do this, we can justify reducing it?
Madam Chair, staff have been working with the applicant to try and achieve the parking required under the bylaw. That is obviously our main objective. We are working, though, on the premise that we're trying to clean up the site. To answer the question, there's nothing wrong with the bylaw. The bylaw is based on average rates of different type of industrial activities or within an industrial site. In any industrial site, you're going to have warehousing, office, retail, manufacturing, storage. By and large, the bylaw is still valid. What we've done on this site is, as a means of controlling this particular site, is we're seeking 2 things. One, a restrictive covenant, which essentially sets the amount of retail and office to its current limit. So in other words, understanding that anyone who's going to potentially purchase the site would understand the range of parking available for the range of uses on the property. And secondly, that as a condition of the development variance permit, that it be on-site parking management that has to be undertaken. Without those, we would have concerns. But with those in place and with the parking management and parking study being developed, we're comfortable that this particular site, on balance, given that storage will now be limited to the building, would generally be supported.
Okay, and so the study says 11 spaces, proponents proposing 13, and I don't know a lot about your business, so it seems to me that 1 visitor space isn't very much for business, and so you could theoretically maybe have 3 visitor spaces if you go from 11 to 13. Are you comfortable with that be?
Actually, our employee car is less than 6. Our employee, they have a 4 vehicle, because majority of them, they use the SkyTrain, is very close to us, and we have a 4, they live far away. Means we have a 3 parking spots will be.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no one else, then I have a few comments. I, too, am quite concerned about the parking. We've also had some correspondence from your neighbors, and they're quite concerned about the parking. And parking on the street is at a premium there down on Tupper. So we're delighted that you are refurbishing the site. That's a wonderful thing to us. But in my opinion, we just have to get the parking up a bit. You are redoing the site now. Is there no way that you can add another 3 or 4 spots?
Actually, is a bylaw. We work with, all the officer you had and everything. The size of the parking spot they wanted, unfortunately, that the way will be. We came with the 15, but one of them as a rotation of the truck wasn't acceptable, which we don't have even that size truck, but they said as a rule they have to be that rotation being there. That's the reason we lost the 1 parking spot because of that rotation. And the size of the car we use as a maximum size, the biggest car we have. That's the reason we lost the 1 more for that.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of the people that you have coming to the site probably have larger SUVs and trucks rather than little teeny tiny smart cars.
Yes.
I am having difficulty with this, so I'm afraid I can't support it based on a reduction from 19 down to 13. That is just too large a reduction in an area that is very obviously going through redevelopment now, and it will be between other neighbors, not just yourself. So if we give this large a reduction for one business on the street, then other neighbors are going to be looking at us too for reductions, and the street just isn't that big.
No any property left around us.
Pardon?
We are the last one in that area, which, because we have to put a new sidewalk and everything over there and city light and, rest of the requirement, we're losing the one more spot because of that.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. A question through staff then with respect to the number of parking spaces. This gentleman has indicated the problem with truck rotation and parking. Is it possible to get another couple of parking spots?
Madam Chair, I believe that we've assessed the plan on the basis of technical appropriateness. I mean, this is an industrial site. It's going to have trucks, whether this gentleman owns it or not. We want to make sure that it functions properly for the type of trucks that would be loading and unloading. I have no issue in terms of reviewing that matter again and seeing whether we can squeeze more stalls on there. I'm pretty comfortable. We've looked technically at the plan. It's a very, very tight site plan.
Okay.
But we'll do our best to see if there's any additional stalls that can be achieved.
So it is very tight. Thank you.
So I guess we could go with the recommendations we have here, or we could refer it back to staff until next Monday to see if they can come up with a few more parking spots. So I would ask your indulgence. Which would you like to do?
I'm willing to put it through. If staff's already looked at it and they're satisfied and it's a tight plan, then I'm willing to put it through.
Okay, then put your motion forward. You're moving the recommendations then?
Yes.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Sorry, could I speak?
Councillor Nicholson?
Thank you. I don't think I can support it on the basis of the information I've heard so far, and I wasn't quick enough. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. One of your neighbors has suggested that at present you store materials across the street at 910.
We rent it up from across the street.
Mm-hmm.
Warehouse, because it's we cannot use our yard.
And will that continue, or with this would you be giving that up?
Depends of the market and depends of the businesses right now. We're using the across the street as a parking lot too, because we rented up the one property. We got a 3 parking spot in there, and we left it that one for any of the customer, which we don't have that much walking customer. We working with the big development. Majority of work is high rises which are around here. We did all of them, and we don't have that much walking customer to come, stop there and everything.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have the recommendations as written have been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is defeated. However, I would recommend that staff can perhaps talk to the applicant and see if we can still work further with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item, item 4, concerns a series of development variance permits for addresses at 3459, 3461, and 3463 Victoria Drive, and 3458, 3460, 3462 Wilkie Avenue. Recommendations that Council approve the signing and sealing of these development variance permits, and the Mayor and City Clerk be authorized to execute them.
So moved.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second. I've got a question.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
I just have a, I hope that means yes. So if the variance meets our overall intent, I guess it's section 1007, subsection 11 of RS7, is this about us being a little bit too prescriptive? If we have an intent and then we have this is how you achieve that. Is this more about creating that becomes a barrier? We're getting lots of variances here.
Okay, staff.
Through the chair, I don't believe there's anything wrong with the bylaw. This is specific to the architecture of this type of product. It's Georgian. It's a very, very flat facade type of dwelling. the way staff typically view these is that the 85% is still very valid to achieve that, 85% of the upper story. There's a lot of good reasons for doing that. It does improve the street character, the articulation of the building. This particular architecture is not very conducive to stepping back the second story because it's supposed to be essentially speaking to the Georgian model. What we've done is looked at it our approach is what's trying to be achieved, what's the alternative that we're getting. In this case, we're still getting a covered front entry with a stoop that still achieves essentially the type of front porch-like element. So we're finding a way to meet that objective. Staff are still seeking the 85% generally speaking, and it's really just a specific part of the architecture proposed.
Great, thank you.
And one of the things I might mention, the conversation I had with staff on this is just site-specific. This isn't changing the whole bylaw. It's just that apparently it's going to carry on with the land use and make it more conducive to the surrounding area as well. Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, and just maybe to emphasize that point, we recognize after a while that this is a constant stream of variances. It really brings in question the bylaw. And as Raul said, we feel the bylaw, this bylaw requirement, there's validity to it. There's benefit to it as well. You go out and see some of the new neighborhoods developing up in the Northeast. And I think that there is visual benefit. There's an aesthetic there that's being achieved. This one, it is site-specific. It goes along with the development package that's been established there. I know Raul and the staff worked closely with the applicant to try to make sure that the intent was there. We just didn't want a slab-sided box. Mm-hmm. Okay, we understand the design approach of the Georgian style, but can we not enhance it somehow? And I think they've done as well as they can. I think in the future, I think maybe that design motif is kind of getting a little overused, and I think in the future we would not be as keen for seeing that, and I think our support in the future would be a lot more reserved. So I think as well as the bylaw is valid. I think there's good value there. There's sort of a special exception in this case, but I don't think we want to tolerate a whole lot more of this.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? No? It's been moved, seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Stewart. You're so quiet. I remember you.
You waved back at me. Maybe you just thought I was waving.
No. It's been so long. I forgot you were there.
Okay. Thank you. I agree with both of those comments because I remember about 20 years ago I was on the RS1S Advisory Committee in Vancouver, and we were doing about the same thing, stepping back the second story and then running into the inevitable variances. I think these variances are an appropriate way of making the streetscape more varied and making our community more varied. But I do believe that the purpose of the bylaw is well served, and all we're really asking the development industry is abide by this or come by and tell us what you're going to do to make it irrelevant. Clearly on Georgian we can't step back the second story or it will look silly. So I think this is an appropriate way to go.
Okay. So we were moved, seconded. Did we all vote? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on.
Item 5 is authorization for the issuance of a development permit for 1460 Southview Street and 1480 Southview Street for Cedar Creek, a street-oriented village home development. The staff recommendations that Council approve the signing and sealing of both development permits, and the Mayor and City Clerk be authorized to execute them.
And I would like staff to comment on this particular project before we go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of remarks, then I'll hand it off to Raul, who's been working closely with the file manager and the applicant on this one. Committee may recall this actually was, I think we had our July 26th committee meeting. It was referred back to staff at that time. I think there were some concerns around the height and siting. It is, to be honest, it is a challenging site. It's up at the very north end of Coast Meridian near Harper Drive. The original plan had called for a park in there. And that had to change due to environmental aspirations about bringing back to life a dry creek bed, and that's been accommodated to make it an amenity of the site. There was further challenges in just the resulting parcels and getting access and and the grades across there, and just fitting it all together. And so I think the solution that they're coming forward with, the layout for the development permit for the two portions of the site, both above and below the watercourse corridor, makes sense. I think it's a good solution. But it just recognizes that there's challenges around these sites, and that you get into sort of the finer details in the particularly the development permit stage, and sometimes it calls for that sort of tweaking to take place. Now, around what has been worked out with the applicant to address the siting and height concerns, I'll hand it off to Raul and let him elaborate on that.
Thank you, Jim. Madam Chair, there's a number of variances that are on table as part of the approvals on this site. The majority of the variances relate to just dealing with the elevations on the property. The key variance that we had a number of discussions around were the height variance on building 1 and 2, which are adjacent to the single-family development to the south. This was the one key area where we felt gradient really needed to be addressed in the context of the variance. The applicant did assess the issue and did make what we feel are substantive amendments by moving buildings 1 and 2 further north by 10 feet. So they essentially compensating for the additional height variance by pushing the buildings away, adding more distance, more landscaping areas, and we feel that adequately compensates and deals with the grade and the adjoining properties effectively. So on that basis, we are moving forward with request for approval for these 2 projects.
Okay, and also, Mr. McIntyre, as you mentioned to me before, and perhaps this is something of interest to the committee, this is one site that after we got on it, that the DFO asked to have something to revitalize the creek.
Yes, that's my understanding. There is a dry channel that I guess historically had been there, but it was not. And
for years.
Presently. So it was part of the finer detail site planning that took place and resulted in the layout that's before us now, along with the challenges around the topography. So yeah, you're quite correct. Is when you get into that more detailed site planning stage, you'll encounter those sort of challenges and opportunities.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Is there any questions? No?
I'll move recommendation.
Thank you. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item 6, please.
Item 6 is a preliminary report on a zoning amendment bylaw application for bylaw 4150 and pertains to 405 Mundy Street. Recommendations the council give first reading to zoning amendment bylaw 4150 and that this bylaw and its related application be referred to public hearing.
Anyone move?
Move recommendation.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 7 is consideration of fourth and final reading to official community plan amendment bylaw number 4132 and zoning amendment bylaw 4133. Relates to 1450 Johnson Street. Staff recommendations that council give fourth and final reading to official community plan amendment bylaw 4132 and that fourth and final reading be given to zoning amendment bylaw 4133.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 8 is also about consideration of fourth and final reading. This is for OCP amendment bylaws 4142 and 4144 and zoning amendment bylaws 4143, 4145, and 4146 pertaining to 3445 Gislason Avenue. These are parcels SC13, SC16. Recommendations of council give fourth and final reading to the OCP bylaws and fourth and final reading to the zoning amendment bylaws.
Recommendation.
Second.
And just before we go to the vote, there are covenants, as we all know, on land use that go with these recommendations. These readings will go forward. There has to be, they have to redo the property lot lines in order to capture the land that's being given to the city. And at that subdivision point in time, the covenants will be ready and registered all at the same time, just so that you can be assured of that. Linda, I'm sorry, Councillor Reamer, go ahead.
My question actually it relates to the rainwater infiltration because we had asked the question whether that's different for single family and for multifamily. And certainly in your report, it does indicate, it says 80 to 90% for new development. So, and then you also reference 80 to 90% for multifamily development. Is that the same for single? If you had new single-family development, would that be the same?
Madam Chair, I can try to respond on part of that, and I noticed that Bill Suzak and Dana are here as well, so they can speak from an engineering perspective. Rainwater management guidelines, they are more extensive for the multifamily sites, and we went through a process a couple of years back working that out. Typically for the multifamily sites, you have a little more opportunity in terms of the site planning and landscaping and central control as well. You typically have a strata that can sort of take responsibility and manage some of these more leading edge groundwater infiltration features. And so the thinking at the time was keep it simple for the single family. You know, things like depth of topsoil, grading where you can to pervious areas, but not loading up on the single family some of the other maybe higher tech measures where you can get the groundwater recharge, because sometimes you've got some not a lot of space left on the lots for that type of feature. So that's kind of where it was left off. I know Bill and Dana particularly looked at this and the questions that we raised and gave us some really good input that found its way to the report. So I'm not sure, Bill or Dana, if you want to comment as well.
Mr. Susak?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just say a few brief words and turn it over to Dana. The approach that we're taking is an overall watershed approach, where we're saying overall in the watershed, 80% or whatever the number is, 80 to 90% is our target. There are probably a few more opportunities on the multifamily site with respect to strategies to implement than on single-family sites because of the nature of the single-family and the small lot. However, off the site, in single-family neighborhoods, there are probably more opportunities to do rainfall capture on city roads and other city amenities, and so that's where we tend to invest a lot of our efforts in those areas. So we try to capture what's best about the multifamily nature of development, what's best about the single-family nature of development, and optimize the opportunities in that regard. I'll hand it over to Dana for anything further. Thanks.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just as part of the High Creek Watershed Management Plan, the overall target was to try to capture and infiltrate 80 to 90% of all rainfall over a 1-year period. So very little of it actually runs off over land. When Council adopted the rainwater management measures earlier this year, there's a requirement that all multifamily development has to develop facilities to meet those targets. We didn't require the same criteria for single-family development. We just required 300 millimeters of topsoil, which still does quite a bit to capture rainfall, but doesn't actually meet the full target.
Okay, thank you. You answered my question. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Reamer, for bringing that up, because one of the questions I circled here and forgot to ask, the committee had asked staff to work with the High Creek group to see if there's anything that this city could help with respect to the low water. Is anybody doing that? I see sort of little snippets that we've talked to them, but are we doing anything substantive? Mr. Susak.
Yeah, I would say that the process is well underway. We've just received a letter today from the Watershed Society formally requesting our input and assistance, and we intend to call a meeting with the Society ourselves, Port Coquitlam also, of course, and see what we can do to help out their situation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, we had a mover and a seconder. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 9 concerns a 5% provision of parkland pursuant to Section 941 of the LGA for proposed subdivision at 3373 Darwin Avenue. Recommendations that the owner of the proposed subdivision provide 5% cash in lieu.
Recommendation.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 10 relates to an OCP plan amendment from the City of Port Coquitlam pertaining to Dominion Triangle. The first recommendation is that this report be forwarded to this evening's council meeting following the public hearing as an onward transmittal item. And recommendation 2 is that Council direct staff to send a letter with a copy of this report to Port Coquitlam providing comments on the proposed amendment and further reaffirming the need to work together to develop an effective transportation network, including the Fremont corridor that addresses the long-term interests of both cities.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Did you want to speak to that?
I want to ask you just a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just kind of, when this first came to me, I was looking at, I remember all the discussions we've had about how it was so important in central Vancouver and discussions we've had around the table of protecting industrial land. And now they're talking in Port Coquitlam and taking their light industrial and taking it to multifamily, which was something we've always struggled with. And I'm just thinking, how do we really respond to things like that? I'm wondering if there's some preliminary comments that staff might want to say prior to going to public meeting tonight, or whenever the next meeting is.
Mr. McIntyre. Oh, genius, of all things.
Thanks, Madam Chair. No genius thoughts on this one. But no, Council is quite correct. It points out an ongoing dilemma we're facing across the Lower Mainland with these sorts of sites. And I guess ultimately it'll be for the City of Port Coquitlam's Council to weigh in on that and make a decision. I guess there has been a fair bit of discussion through Metro Vancouver and the regional growth strategy and trying to address that. And I think where that plan is evolving, it'll have more control and more direction than we've seen in the past for the Lower Mainland, though there will be some flexibility. So we're trying to find that balance point. I think in this area here, it may have been designated for industrial, but if you look at what's evolving in that community, in that area, maybe what they're proposing makes sense, and it's kind of a logical extension of what's there now. I think certainly what I refer to as sort of the heartland of the Port Coquitlam industrial area, like you go south of the Lougheed and along the Maryhill bypass and that area there. In fact, right through to Broadway and Kingsway, there's extensive industrial in there, and you see a lot of construction going on. And I think that city is quite intent on protecting that area and preserving that. So I think these things have to be looked in balance, and so we've tried to provide sort of more of a neutral view on it, but looking out for where we think the City of Coquitlam's interests are, and that certainly revolves around the eventual future extension of Fremont and how that ties in, because we need to work with our municipal neighbors to make sure those important road links are achieved.
Okay, thank you for those comments.
Okay, we voted. We're done.
Yep.
Next item.
Next item also concerns an OCP plan. It's the City of Port Moody's bylaw 2489, and the recommendation is that Council direct staff to send a letter with a copy of the report to the City of Port Moody, providing comments on its draft OCP.
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We're done.
Item 12 concerns the city policy on third-party consultation fees. The recommendation that Council approve the policy respecting consultation fees in that Coquitlam does not compensate any party, which are listed here, and that Council forward a copy of the report and the approved policy to the Minister of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation, Minister of Community and Rural Development, the Managing Director of LMTAC, other local governments in Metro Vancouver, and First Nations in the regions.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Madam Chair, that's the last formal item on the agenda.
Thank you. And I have one item that I wish to bring up, and I will read from this very wrinkled paper. A letter came dated August 6th, and it's from the province, and it's with respect to liquor license applications. And there's been a change in that we will not, it seems, and I want this clarified by whomever, I've discussed it with Mr. McIntyre, perhaps it's for another department, that we will not have any more local input onto food primary licenses, either the changes to them or issuing new ones. And from a land use perspective, this is a really big deal to me. And excuse me? Fine. I have a bit of a problem with this because I want to make sure that I'm reading this right. And then we got another letter from the city of Burnaby who apparently interpreted it in the same way. The province assures us it has not changed as this result, and that the Act requires local government to go through the same process when providing input on new liquor primary license operations, which is fine. But it's the food primary that can cause us some problems, and perhaps some policing problems and things like that I think we have to take into consideration from a land use point of view. It used to be, well, it still is, that the pubs have very stringent rules by which they have to act. And in the last 10 years or so, the province has changed the liquor application so that now the really trendy places we all love to go, like the Milestones and the Boston Pizzas and the Cactus Clubs and all those wonderful restaurants, they now have TVs and they now have liquor. You have to order minimum numbers of food and that. So they sort of are acting like pubs, which is fine. I'm not having a problem with any of it. Obviously, I love to eat. The problem that comes is that they're talking, Burnaby specifically is concerned about the fact that there's a lot of them that have after-hours entertainment of sorts. And if they're food primary only and we have no local input, like we have had on a few applications that have come in here within the last 6 months, perhaps that shouldn't be. We could essentially have a whole block full of restaurants with food primary licenses serving liquor till whatever time we allow it, midnight or 1 or 2. And if this happens, it may not, but it's something I think we should be aware of, that we can be forcing ourselves to be looking at a bigger policing bill, because food primary places are not subject to the same regulations that pubs are. So I brought this up because I would like to, 1, confirm that this is true, and 2, from a land use perspective, Mr. McIntyre and I've had the conversation, and I just want to see how we as a city are going to deal with something like this. So I just thought I'd let the committee know, and that's where we are. Councillor Lynch.
On a different topic, and we did kind of skim over the Port Moody official community plan, and I had a question on that. If Port Moody is reducing their population projections from 50,000 to 38,000 residents, and we're all kind of buying into the Liberal Region strategic plan, do we see that as putting any pressure on Coquitlam to be absorbing population in any way?
Madam Chair, I would not, and I don't think the final act has been played on that either. The regional growth strategy identifies targets for growth capacity, and those are based on the official committee plans of those municipalities and what they could theoretically accommodate. If a municipality was to back away from that or put in a lower amount, I think they would have some difficulties getting that regional context statement approved by Metro Vancouver. So, I don't think there'd be any pressure or any expectation that other municipalities would pick up that slack. Or we have our plans. We have a vision for Coquitlam, and it works out to a theoretical population and employment at some future point, and that's what we're working towards.
I was just had somewhat of concern that perhaps if one municipality in the northeast sector, and sometimes we're looked at the northeast sector, was not picking up their population expectations, that perhaps it would be the northeast sector in general would be expected to somehow accommodate that. Fair comment. Thank you.
That's a good question. I'm amazed. That's a really good question. Thank you.
I wouldn't mind just commenting on that. And as Jim highlighted, there's a lot of things going on that. If you sort of like discuss behind the scenes what Port Moody is doing, is they're linking it all to rapid transit and those kind of things. And they're going to be adjusting those things. What we have said when they threatened to do this, and this was in discussions with the managers and the mayors, we thanked them for that because we were looking for a kickstart in our town center. So over the next little while, we want that extra little push. I think in the fullness of time, as Jim says, we believe it will even out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anything else? Move to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you for a good meeting. That was fun.
You came back sassy.